Far-left Democrats accused of hypocrisy again. Squad member Cori Bush defends calling to defund the police while having her own private security.
I'm going to make sure I have security because I know I have had attempts on my life and I have too much work to do. There are too many people that need help right now for me to allow that. So if I end up spending $200,000, if I spend 10 more dollars on it, you know what? I get to be here to do the work. So suck it up, and defunding the police has to happen. We need to defund the police and put that money into social safety nets because we're trying to save lives.
Imagine dystopia. You hear that word frequently. What does it mean? Picture it in your mind's eye. Dystopia is a world where the police will not protect you. They refuse. And at the same time, you are not allowed to protect yourself. So who does that leave in charge? Who runs a world like that? Well, young men with guns. They're in charge. The cruelest and most violent element of any society. The people with the least to lose. The shortest time horizons. The shallowest reservoirs of impulse control. People like that have all the power. You have no power. And that means that everything you have is theirs. Again, broad daylight, middle of the day, nice neighborhood in one of America's biggest cities. So what happened next? Well, according to reporting by CWB Chicago, just minutes after Ryan King was threatened with death for daring to walk outside in his own neighborhood, Chicago police spotted the gunman's vehicle. But there was nothing they could do about it. Their supervisor ordered them not to pursue it. So the criminals just drove off. And of course, they committed more violent crimes. In the hours after Ryan King was attacked, 16 more armed robberies were reported in the area. Police believe at least 2 organized armed gangs are now operating with impunity around Bucktown, which means the gangs are in charge now. That's what the collapse of civilization looks like. But it's now normal in Chicago. According to data from the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper, last year, police made arrests in just 12% of reported crimes. That's the lowest level recorded in Chicago history. And that's what it means when politicians hand control of a city to criminals. Here, you run it. In Chicago right now, taxpayers are more likely to be the victims of crime than criminals are to be punished for it. So the question is, why would anyone in Chicago pay taxes? You'd have to be a masochist to do that, and pretty soon only the masochists will be. So how did this happen? Well, it's no mystery. There are many threads, but George Soros is a big one. Soros paid for this to happen. Soros backed a prosecutor called Kim Foxx, who turned Chicago over to the most vicious people who live there. Not the decent, good people in all neighborhoods, the most vicious, antisocial people, the ones who truly don't care about others, who are willing to kill people for their shoes or their car. The worst people. And they run things now. This is from our Fox station in Chicago.
Clutching pictures of loved ones, families come together to share their loss.
My sister's name is Tiara Taylor. She died at 30 years old by the hands of her husband.
It's been 336 days since the murder of my son that was 4 years old.
They're also united in their anger and frustration that the killers of their family members walk free. They largely blame the office of the Cook County State's Attorney and Kim Foxx.
So we ask you, Kim Foxx, how much longer do our families need to suffer in pain and sorrow with no justice for our loved ones being served?
Our children's blood on your hands, Miss Foxx, and I hope you see their faces every night.
You think Kim Foxx cares? You think she's watching? You think those scenes like that penetrate at all the shell of self-esteem that surrounds her? No, of course not. She doesn't care at all. That's why she did it in the first place. Someone should take action immediately on that. But she's not the only person who did this. The federal government also played a role, and you probably didn't know it was happening. Over the 8 years of the Barack Obama administration, the Department of Justice forced more than a dozen police departments around the country to enter into something called dissent decrees. Chicago was one of them. The Obama administration began an investigation into the Chicago Police Department, and they got a consent decree. Now, all of these decrees took the same form. They pronounced police departments guilty of racism if those departments disproportionately interact with African Americans, regardless of whether those interactions were legally justified. In other words, the law is entirely irrelevant to the consent decree, and so is reality itself. Here's a line from the DOJ dissent decree imposed under Obama against Chicago. Quote, raw statistics show that CPD, Chicago Police Department, uses force almost 10 times more often against blacks than against whites. Okay, that's one data point. It's not the whole story. It doesn't begin to tell the whole story. There was no analysis whatsoever about whether the use of force in these specific cases was justified. None. So this is not science. They may have graphs. It's not science. It's some kind of crazed race ideology. It's the equity agenda. And in effect, and this of course was the intended effect, these consent decrees have been a disaster for the people of these cities. Even in New Orleans, whose mayor, as we've told you many times, has driven that city, that beautiful city, which is worth saving, right into the sewer. Even the Democratic mayor of New Orleans said recently, and we're quoting, the consent decrees handcuff our officers. That's an understatement. At this point, New Orleans is essentially out of police officers. The median police response time in New Orleans to 911 calls is over 2 hours. Imagine, armed people in your home. You call the police. 2 hours. A lot can happen in 2 hours. That's the total collapse of civilization. There's no reason to have a government if the response time is 2 hours. Buy your own guns. Establish your own order. That's where we're going to be very soon. On a recent Friday night in that city, New Orleans, one third-year officer called Scott Fanning just quit mid-shift. Here's how he described it. Quote, "That night I quit. There were over 40 calls holding when I logged into my computer. But there were only 35 patrol officers logged in for all 8 districts in the city. Some nights there has literally been one person in a big, dangerous city." But it's not just New Orleans. All over the country, police officers are quitting, and they're not being replaced.
Departments across the country say a lack of officers is severely limiting what they can respond to.
We'll routinely respond to shootings, but if the person is going to survive, we are not going to follow up on that.
So suck it up, and defunding the police has to happen. We need to defund the police and put that money into social safety nets because we're trying to save lives.